So we're going to talk to you about 4 things. And we'll tell you a little bit about who we are, who is MNP. It could stand for many nice people, but it's really assurance, risk, and audit firm. And we serve the mid-market, and Joe's going to go over that as well. We're going to tell you what we did, and as a result of our study, what we found. And we're going to talk to you about next steps.
Okay, so just a little bit about MNP. So we are coast-to-coast, Canada-wide. We serve the mid-market. We have around 100,000 clients. There's over 5,000 members on our team, and over 2,000 of those are CPAs. So we do a lot of work in the professional consulting and audit side, as Hash mentioned. We have offices across the country. We're very proud to serve our First Nation partners, and we have a growing ESG business.
All right, you wouldn't ever get a presentation from an accounting firm without a disclaimer. So the opinions here are a result of a business risk. It is not a legal review. It is not an external financial statement audit. And it was done at a point in time based on information available to us. Someone else with greater resources might have different results. Now that we've... I doubt it. I agree. All right. So what did we do? Well, what we set out to do was establish a working model of how to compare the different blockchain networks, and how they were going to consume energy. Now, the sample networks we chosen was BTC, BCH, and BSV. And what we're going to do, we try to be as boring as possible. We're going to tell you the punchline now. Okay? The punchline is that Bitcoin SV significantly is much more energy efficient. But we're going to tell you how we got there. Okay? And that's the rest of the presentation.
So a little bit of background. So when we approach this study like this, it's important to understand how these proof-of-work consensus mechanisms work and end up consuming power. So the big takeaway here is the more miners that are on the network, it's going to increase the hash power and increase the difficulty, and that means, okay, there's more power being consumed. It's kind of the key takeaway here.
Now, we're a Canadian firm, and as my colleague Joe mentioned, we serve the mid-market, and we have a lot of clients. And it was one of the reasons we decided, because of our reach, because we knew the Canadian mining community, that we'd focus on Canadian miners.
So what really affects consumption? So on the right side of the graph here, these are the processes that drive the consumption of the network. So really, energy consumption breaks down into 2 things. What's the difficulty? And what is the equipment efficiency that's being used to perform the mining operations? And then how do we measure that? So a good comparison to make things standard across blockchains is watt-hours per block, megabytes per block, and watt-hours per megabyte, watt-hours per transaction. So that's how we tried to normalize the data so we could have a good comparison across the networks.
So it's important that, like many others, we built on the research others had done. We, having done our homework, understood that most people were approaching it based on the equipment being used. I think that makes sense. If you can approximate the energy consumption of the equipment, and you know the kind of equipment in a network, you can approximate the energy consumption of the network. Now, there's 3 slides with a whole bunch of assumptions. And I think this is important to understand. One of the things we're going to do when we release the study is provide the framework. We're going to release it. It's meant to be transparent, and we want the assumptions to be well understood. Future work would then take those assumptions, drill in, validate what they could, what the researchers can, and those assumptions that aren't valid, address them.
So how do we actually calculate the consumption estimation? And it's pretty straightforward. We take the equipment energy efficiency, we multiply it by the hash rate, and then we multiply it by time to get it in units like kilowatt hours. Now, the thing is, when we calculate network consumption, it's not a great comparison across chains because some networks have more nodes and more miners. It's just the way it is. So our key efficiency criteria for the comparison is the consumption, the average energy consumption per block, the average energy consumption per transaction, and the average energy consumption per megabyte validated. So now we're going to get into, what did we actually find? This is my favorite part about this report. So the big takeaway is that Bitcoin, BTC, consumes a significant amount of energy more than the other two protocols. If you can see the little green line and the little blue line compared to the orange, we're talking orders of magnitude huge here. So we calculated it. How did we do? So we took data that we collected, and we compared it to Canadian miners who were mining BTC. And fortunately, we only had about a 1.5% difference of our actual calculated values. So, check the box. We're starting to validate that this model actually works. And then we compared to an actual miner of BSV. Now, the biggest gap was early on in early Q3 2020. So our estimate was off by about 28%. Now, we think that it is a result of firms having some better technologies that wasn't really representative in our in how we came up with our calculation. So really, this is the big takeaway here. So Bitcoin is increasing in consumption over time for both kilowatt hours per transaction and watt hours per megabyte. So, early 2020, we're talking 430 kilowatt hours per transaction, up to 706 kilowatt hours per transaction in 2021. But if we look at the other side of things and we look at BSV, there is a completely different story. As BSV goes through time, I know it's a little hard to see on the graph just because having to include Bitcoin in there because it's so much bigger. It's actually trending downward over time. So we're talking about 2.4 kilowatt hours per transaction in Q2 of this year. So really, it's a story about throughput, and it's a story about block size. So BSV averages more transactions, and so it's going to be more energy efficient. So just to kind of touch on the major key findings here. So accuracy. Was our model accurate? So the answer is yes. And we believe that the discrepancies are because there's innovations at mining firms who engage in crypto asset mining that weren't necessarily captured from our model. And then the other key takeaway piece here is protocol efficiency. BSV is much more energy efficient per transaction. And the reason for this is the uncapped limit on block size. Now, Hash is going to talk a little bit about what is coming up next.
So what's next is the teaser we've given you here today, that we've touched. The full report is going to be released in the next couple of months. Again, if you know anything about assurance firms or audit firms, it's going through quality control. Independent reviewers look at it, validate it, make sure there's support, evidence all the way through. No single partner can influence the results. It is a firm product. And that firm product will be released in the weeks ahead. I think that's it. I'm trying to think of something clever to say to close this off. But I'll just tell you that I changed my name, Hassan Qureshi, to Hash Qureshi. Oh, that's not true. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bitcoin mining, Bitcoin wallet, blockchain, stablecoins, MetaNet, the evolution of money. Everybody is talking about Bitcoin today, but what exactly is it? Learn the basics from experts. Learn what Bitcoin is, how it works, and why it matters. Bitcoin 101, your ultimate guide to the fundamentals of blockchain.